Hello, my name is Grace Homer, and I'm doing my final project on the war on drugs. Many current illegal drugs, such as opium, marijuana, and psychedelics, have been used in many cultures around the world for thousands of years. It wasn't until recently, in the last century, that we have become more likely to be anti drugs. However, there is a dark side of the history of why people started becoming anti marijuana, anti cocaine. For instance, the first anti marijuana laws in the Midwest and the Southwest between the 1910s and 20s were directly associated with discrimination against the Mexican migrants and Mexican Americans. Still, even today, the Latino group have been wildly disproportionate in arrests made by law enforcement. However, most of the war on drugs started in 1971 under the President Nixon administration. Even though there are many groups that didn't want this to happen, in 1972 even a commission recommended decriminalizing marijuana for personal use, which Nixon then declined. After his presidency in 1977, President Carter was elected on a platform of decriminalizing marijuana. However, fears of the parents in the United States and the recent surge in teenagers using marijuana led to the decriminalization to be completely abandoned by President Carter. Hysteria came, and many families around the country began to have an anti drug policy in their homes as well as in the federal government. Politicians began to run on this platform of anti drug. Under Reagan's presidency, incarceration rates skyrocketed. Non-violent drug law offenses were increased in the prisons to 50,000 people in 1980 alone. The First Lady Nancy Reagan doubled down with an anti-drug campaign. Her campaign was Just Say No. In the mid to late 1980s, Los Angeles Police Chief Daryl Gates began the program of the DARE program, which was adopted nationwide quickly, despite evidence of its effectiveness. The consequences of the war on drugs. 317,176 prisoners, or just 15% of the prison population, has been convicted of a drug-related offense. However, this is not the federal prison population, which is overwhelmingly 50%. This obviously leads to overcrowding in our prisons. It also led to an increase of AIDS and HIV, as syringes were discredited and not allowed to be used by normal citizens. Therefore, they had to share their needles. The mass criminalization, which leads to many people with records, which makes it hard to find jobs, homes, and support their families, was created, and 40% of all drug arrests in 2005 was for possession of marijuana. It has been known that 485,000 people were arrested in 2015 for marijuana possessions. This has shown that there's been an increase in people's lives being ruined. So, who uses drugs? Well, there's links between substance abuse and poverty. Poor and unemployed people, socially excluded people, and it disproportionately represents ethnic and minority groups, bad people with bad health, and people who come from bad family environments. All of these people are already subject to vulnerabilities, but now they have the war on drugs there to push them down even further. So, how do we know the war on drugs is using discrimination as a tool and means for a war on drugs? Well, a top Nixon aide, John Ehrlichman, has explained his actions with the Nixon organization. He says, "You want to know what this is really all about. The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies: the anti war left and the black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and the blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities and we could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. When we look at the root of the problem and where this all stemmed from, it has always stemmed for a political motive. Though some would argue there are good things about the war on drugs. Here are the two goals of why some would argue for the war on drugs. If there's drug-free communities, if all the abusers and dealers are imprisoned, no one else would bring drugs into the community. However, this is unlikely and unrealistic. There will always be someone to do the job. Deterrence and lessening due to the threat of going to jail. People are more or less likely to commit a crime than to go to jail for the consequences of it. Many countries around the world have dealt with their sense of anti-war or anti-drug or war on drugs phenomenon. However, other countries are taking a different approach. Portugal has decriminalized all drug use in 2001 for the possession and the use of drugs. However, selling is still a crime. It is handled more as a public health problem versus a crime. It is an addiction, which is a disease. Cases of substance abuse is handled by counselors, psychologists, and social workers instead of police officers and jail time. The results are staggering compared to our efforts at controlling drugs. Drug abuse was cut in half. It is also less expensive than incarceration in the United States. They are more likely to find recovery than being sent to jail, as jails only harden a person and create webs where people can further their criminal acts. And they're less likely to see it as a crime and more likely to see it as a disease. And this will be seen by the public as well. As you can see on the slide, this is any illegal drug use in Portugal in the past year and past month among the youth of ages 15 through 24 and general population 15 through 64. As you can see, from the basis of 2001 to 2012, drug use has been annihilated almost, and I believe will continue to slow down. Americans have given a great load of thought on the war on drugs in the recent years. For instance, in 2014, A Pew poll found that 2/3 of respondents believe that people should no longer be prosecuted for cocaine or heroin. 21 states replaced criminal sanctions of civil fine only for possession of marijuana. And other states altogether have decided to legalize marijuana. Programs and local legislation are changing drug offenses in certain states and cities. For instance, Seattle LEAD, which is a program that was started in the past 5 years, was developed for police officers to direct them to a drug treatment center in lieu of arresting them. My final thoughts. Progress is inevitably slow, but I do believe that we will get to where we need to be, and we will shape drug policies on science and compassion rather than political hysteria. I believe in the next few years we will see drug decriminalization in states like Colorado and Washington, which will be the leaders in the forefront for this movement, to start seeing that people who are addicted to drugs are not criminals, but rather people with a disease. I hope soon that there will be safe consumption sites and policy reform in order to allow people, instead of going to jail, go to rehab and get better. Almost 500,000 people are still behind bars for nothing more than a drug law violation. I hope in the coming years those people will be let off and healing will take place where rehab is available for everyone in every state. Reform is coming, but it will take a while.